Good morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. And this is a little bit unfamiliar, isn't it? There are, of course, very few occasions when the back page moves to the front page, as newspaper people can never stop thinking about it. Sports stories become news stories. And today is, well, for most of us, and I speak as a chap born in 1972, so 6 years after an England football team last won a major international competition, that's the story of the day. It's just mad. It's utterly lovely. There was a little bit of me, and I hope this doesn't sound sort of mildly sexist, there was a little bit of me that wondered, as the tournament went on, whether the engagement and the excitement would be the same as for the men's team. Not because of any genetic or gender-based differences, but simply because of investment. Because I've watched the England men's football team so many times over so many years that I wondered whether they would turn out to have a slightly different place in my heart than the women's football team, but clearly not. I mean, to be honest, by the quarters, absolutely on it. And then the amazing semi-final. The semi-final in many ways a more incredible game than the final because we just played like England teams never play. Or again, like England's men's teams never play. The pressure, early pressure, resisted, and then not snatching it at the last, but just sort of getting ahead and then absolutely driving it home. It's magnificent. But then the history kicked in, and fair play to two of my all-time favourite broadcasters anyway, Ian Wright and Alex Scott. Ian Wright in particular, not because, only for the very simple reason that I think he's been incredible in a million different spheres, whereas Alex is a relatively newer arrival to the public space. I think if you listen to Ian talking about his experience of therapy and becoming a person he didn't want to see in the mirror in the morning and the hard work he's done to him. I just find the man is an inspiration to me. I've told him personally, and I'll tell you as well. He is an absolute legend. And both him and Alex Scott, who, of course, had lived this experience, which made her contribution even more powerful, talking about how the women's game has been maligned and undermined and underfunded and worse. I did not realise that it was actually banned by the Football Association because, as I understand it, and you may have a better understanding of this story, they felt threatened by the popularity of the game. I know that during the war, I can't actually remember which war, I do apologise, possibly both wars, but I think the First World War, actually. No, I do, because there was a War Cup during the Second World War. Brentford are currently the holders of it because it got called off after 1942, and Brentford, I think, beat Northampton in the final in 42 or 43. So they are officially the holders of the War Cup. But the women's teams in the First World War were drawing the sort of crowds that you could only dream of these days. I mean, absolutely epic crowds. And I mean, it was 30 years later when they banned the women from playing, but quite why they would do that. It's just not, well, you know why they did it, because one of our favourite things on this programme, in some ways perhaps our very favourite thing, is change and transformation, progress, as many people prefer to call it, when you can see things getting better. And in this case, things getting better despite the fact that relatively recently there was a strong opposition to the very existence of women's football, or at least the popularity of women's football. I find it fantastic. I remember sitting here listening to other people on LBC moaning about lineswomen being introduced into the game, or moaning about female commentators. I tell you now, some of the abuse that's been directed at female commentators, or when they first started contributing to Match of the Day. I don't know if misogyny is a fair word to employ. I personally think it probably is, but I don't know that sort of attitude betrays an actual hatred of women. It betrays perhaps a slightly milder bigotry and more a hatred of change as opposed to a hatred of women. Also, a lot of people making some interesting observations about the difference in tone of the whole experience. I can tell you now that London is not full of sort of vandalised portable toilets, that no one in Leicester Square stuck a flare up their backside yesterday while mooning at the assembled crowds. There was a much more family-friendly and the sort of hooligan element seemed to be absent. But again, one European Cup victory does not, or Euro victory does not a summer make. It delights me that the change has happened in such a simultaneously spectacular and incremental way. And that doesn't happen very often. Normally, incremental change takes ages and you don't really notice it happening. And spectacular change goes off like a firework. But this has somehow managed to be both incremental and spectacular. There have been baby steps towards that moment last night, but there have also been enormous strides at the same time. And people like Alex Scott on the telly, part of that history of unfairness, part of that history of injustice, in the way that if you were a woman, and this is what we're going to talk about today, if you were a woman or a girl trying to play football, I'm not sure most of us understand quite how hard that was. Now, I also have the double problem of having attended an all-boys school for pretty much most of my life. I last had girls in my classroom when I was 6.5 years old at the Holy Trinity Convent in Kidderminster, in Sister Mary Francis's class, Junior 1, if you're interested. And so I don't know what it was like if you were a girl who wanted to play football in the 1970s or the 1980s, but I suspect it was pretty tough. I have daughters, of course, but they haven't been drawn towards football in particular. They've been drawn to other sports. I don't know what the situation would have been if they fancied it, but that is the thing that interests me most today. I think it's also the most interesting element of the conversation. Give me a call and let everybody else know how hard it was in the 19. And we can go as far back as you want. We might have a sort of a 1940s. I'm trying to think of a girl's name that begins with R, so I can do a quick rewrite of Roya, the Rachel of the Rovers. We might have a 1940s Rachel of the Rovers listening to the programme today. And that's all I want to do. I just want to get an idea of what it was like on the pitch in the country in PE classes. Not allowed to do football at PE. So that's it. There is, inevitably a couple of texts coming in from really sad people moaning about this. Let me read you one. LMFAO at James Singing for Women, our 17B team would thrash. But goodness me. And then referring to the fact that we had IVF treatment for our children. He did need artificial insemination to breed 2 girls. Now, misogyny is an overused word, but this is Brian here getting in touch with the programme at 11 minutes after 10 on a Monday morning. That is what it feels like to actually hate women, to genuinely hate women. We're going to bypass that attitude today. We'll thank Brian for his lovely contribution. Hope his week picks up sooner rather than later. But we'll focus instead upon what it was like growing up for you to be a woman or a girl who wanted to play football. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973. I will allow dads and coaches to contribute, male coaches to contribute, but I would suggest, chaps, that we and I know I'm presenting the programme, so there's a touch of the pot kettle black here. I would suggest, chaps, that we possibly leave the floor clear at first. I don't know that needs to be explained. So what was it like in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s? What were PE teachers like? How did they treat you? How was it responded to? If you didn't have a parent who was absolutely adamant that you could play football, what actually happened to you? How big a mountain have these women climbed to get to where they are today? I remember America in the is it the Olympics? The American women's team in the Olympics, was that the seminal one when everything changed in America and soccer suddenly became, as they prefer to call it, soccer suddenly became very much the women's game, the women's team game in America. Quite often the boys would still play, the men would still play American football, gridiron, and the women or the girls would play association football, as we call it, or soccer as they prefer to term it. And I think last night's bound to be like that. I'll play you both goals because I just want to see whether they still send a shiver down my spine. The magical moments being, of course, things that will go down in history. Ella Toon's goal, obviously technically far superior. I mean, a lob is an almost impossible thing to pull off unless you've got ice running through your veins. And she's only got the goalie to beat, albeit that there's a defender absolutely leaning in on her shoulder. She's only been on the pitch 5 minutes. And then a much, much scrappier business. But again, actually, it was quite a Lineker-ish goal, wasn't it, that Chloe Kelly scored in the extra time, in the second half of extra time, very much in the 6-yard box and just fighting for every scrap. Thankfully, and I think to our eternal joy, successfully. Were you a veritable Rose of the Rovers back in the day? And of course, the second question, attendant upon all of the past experiences of women or girls football, is very simply the impact, the importance of last night's event. So we'll do that as well. I mean, I love the idea. Here's one thing I did think, as I only have daughters, and I did think that there'll be some serious beef going on in families up and down the country when daughters now, for the foreseeable future, sisters can turn around to brothers and say, we're better at football. We've won a big trophy. In 2022, you have to go all the way back to 1966 before you can cite a men's football team victory. And that, of course, is the point. You know, they won. And I love that idea. If that's happening in your house, I wonder how you police it. If you've got a couple of, I don't know, a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old, and the little girl is now able. So they've got bragging rights. The girls have got the bragging rights over the boys after really years of the boot, if you pardon the rather perfect metaphor, the boot being on the other foot. 16 minutes after 10 is the time. I've still got a couple of phone lines free. 2 questions, really, but also one of those mornings where we're just going to chat about a major event from whatever perspective you prefer, except, of course, the misogyny and the self-hatred. I haven't got time to deal with that today, or the energy. But the simple questions of how hard was it to be a female footballer in your day? 0345 6060 973. And what does last night's victory mean? To you, to them, to anyone? It is 18 minutes after 10, and it is a morning that no one has a guidebook for. No one in the media has a precedent to draw upon. Nobody knows how to handle this. Football came home last night when the England women were crowned Euro champions after a 2-1 victory over Germany. But talk to me about the mountain that British women or English women have climbed in order to see these women at that peak. Laura is in Sheffield. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hi there, good morning, James.
Hello, Laura.
It just sort of took me back a little bit there when you were talking about the history that women have had to go through to get to this point. I'll sort of keep it brief so I don't get emotional, because it is an emotional day, I think, for a lot of people.
You can be as emotional as you want on this programme, Laura.
Thanks, James. About 12 years old.
Right.
And I went to a Catholic secondary school in Sheffield. And myself and my friends were massively into football. I've got 2 brothers. They were both in teams. Every Sunday was just about going to football matches. I played with them in the garden. Massive football fans as a family. And I was desperate to play. And I was probably not a bad little player, to be honest, as well.
Yeah.
And we asked at school, because the girls obviously were all trundled off to the yard to do netball, and the boys all got to go on the field in their football boots and kick the ball around. And we kept asking if we could play. And we were told flatly by our PE teacher, girls cannot and do not play football. And that was in 1989. Myself and my friends, luckily the trade unionists in us,
yes.
We actually did a sit-down protest in one of the goals. We all got into the goal and sat there and refused to move until they'd at least consider letting us play football. This is at 12 years old.
Oh, I like that. We shall not be moved.
Yeah, totally. So we all ended up sort of getting sent to the head teacher. But to be fair, it sort of opened the dialogue, and they came up with the conclusion that we could play, but we weren't allowed to play with the boys. We would have to play on the yard, and we were kind of given a ball and a couple of cones and sent to the bottom of the yard, anyone who wanted to kick the ball around. So there was no coaching, teaching or anything like that, but it was a small step. but I'd like to think we did a little bit.
You did. You were a pioneer. Did the enthusiasm sustain? I mean, because I think that when you're a kid, the first time that you wear, even if it's just the school team, when you actually wear a strip and when you actually feel part of a formal game and you play to the whistle, it's unspeakably exciting, and you were denied that. Yeah, privilege,
we were.
Pleasure.
I mean, there was never a girls' football team at that school. They never did it. It just didn't. That wasn't something that was around then. I mean, I've now got two daughters that are 13 and 8.
Right.
They're both in football teams. They both won managers player of the season last year. They're superb little players. So I'm just living through them. I'm absolutely living through them. But again, this battle is still going on, James. My eldest is at senior school.
Right.
They do a token girls' football on a Monday night or whatever. The boys have had 13 matches in the last year where they've gone out and they've played against other teams in Sheffield. The girls' team had one. They had one match. So the disparity is still there. When they train, if they have to train on the same night, the boys go on the pitch with the posts and the girls are given cones. So it's still a long, long, long way to go. And I just think that those women last night, I mean, boy, did they do us proud. And I just think they've done that in spite of all those hurdles, and they haven't had the funding, and they don't get the wages, and they don't get the interest and the support and everything else. They've done that in spite of that, and I just think I could not be more proud of them. I think, and seeing my daughters watch that, and both of them going, that could be, that'll be us one day. We'll be on there. It's incredible. Super proud.
That's historic, that moment, isn't it? Because it's not just a win or the win. It is when you bring your daughters into it. It is seeing. It was representation. That's the word we're looking for. They actually now see people on top of a mountain and think, I can climb that mountain.
Absolutely. Seeing them pick that trophy up and wave it in the air. And they, as I say to them, I mean, they'll probably never realise that, which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that they don't look at that and then see the hurdles that those women have overcome. They just see women being absolutely superb. The atmosphere, we went to 4 matches over the Euros. We're from Sheffield, so we're very lucky. It was on our doorstep. We went to the semi-final. The atmosphere is just amazing. You sit with the other fans. If their team does something good, you clap, they clap. There's no angst, there's no swearing. It's just... and that semi-final, as I say, it was about 27,000 at Bramall Lane.
Yes, of course.
And at the end, everybody was up and waving and singing. And these are sort of like 30-year-old guys going as a man's night out, and they were loving it. It was just superb. I just think they all deserve to be getting MBEs or OBEs or whatever.
Yeah, they will, and hopefully, a few quid as well. Although, as you remind us, still nothing like the amount of money that male footballers who won a major international trophy could expect to make. But, Rome wasn't built in a day, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good are the favourite cliches of the moment. Enjoy the progress that's been made. In fact, odd person to bring... Laura, thank you. That was lovely. An odd person to bring into the conversation, but Mick Lynch, very much in the news at the moment for largely unfootball-related reasons, gave me an absolutely riveting interview on Friday and made that point repeatedly about the whole point of his job is to win progress, to win improvements for his members, not all in one go, but a bit at a time. And of course, people often need reminding of that in this modern world. Sarah is in Cardiff. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Just to sort of echo everyone else, really ecstatic and emotional about yesterday's win. I started playing football 24 years ago at 12 years old.
Right.
At the time, me and my best friend were actually on holiday and started playing with some boys. And when we got home, I said to my dad, I really want to play football. We looked around, but there was nothing for girls in our area. So he said, well, look, if you get enough friends together, I'll be your coach and we'll start a team. Oh. So we did. A lot of the girls were our friends, and some of them weren't even sporty, but it felt, looking back, it's like a fairy tale. Sorry, it's emotional.
No,
so we got a team together. My dad became our manager. We got sponsored by the local kebab house and became affiliated to the local team.
I don't know what's my favourite bit there. Affiliation to the local team was sponsored by the local kebab house.
Yeah, they bought us goalposts. They bought us a kit. We got our write-ups in the local newspaper. We joined the Peter Houseman League in Winchester, and we ended up winning the league.
Did you really?
And yeah, we did.
Oh,
yeah,
sensational.
And it was brilliant. But one of the things that I was mentioning just before I came online was, so we started off at 12 years old. We then played under 14s, under 16s, but at the time there was a massive gap. So a lot of our players, we were the under 16s league, but some of our players were still 14 years old. However, there was nothing at the time for under 17s, under 18s. So we went from playing 6-a-side league football with some 14-year-old players, and we were quite slight, to going to a women's league, 11-a-side football against women that were 30 years old. So, I mean, it was huge, and it was such a struggle for some of our players, and there was like a massive gap then. I've got to be honest, I got to university and I stopped playing, so I'm not sure. I'm hoping, looking at last night, I'm guessing it's a lot better now and the infrastructure's better. But seeing yesterday the full stands and the support was just something that I could, it was like a dream.
Yeah, no, I like that point about universities, because you just ran out of road, didn't you? And without the commitment of your group or your dad or yourself, you couldn't start again when you got to university from scratch, which is, would it have been from scratch, or was there a women's team there? You just didn't fancy it?
Well, no, there was actually. So what happened is a lot of our players, when we were under 16, so some of the players left the club, and we did actually get some of older players from different teams come and join, and we did compete in the women's league. But then I just kind of, maybe it's to do with role models. And when I got to university, there just wasn't the kind of same hype as the men's football. I mean, all of our role models when we were kids were like, I used to love Gianfranco Zola. They were all men. We all had men as role models. And I just think that, again, there wasn't the same kind of excitement around women's football.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. They're not going to be running around the park this summer holiday pretending to be male footballers, are they? They're going to be running around the park pretending to be female footballers.
Yeah, definitely.
Mary Earps in particular, I think, because goalies are always quite a lonely breed. I was a goalie for a while as a kid, and I think Mary Earps was magnificent, probably my favourite on the pitch last night. And it's lovely that they are going to become, if they're not already, they are going to become household names. What was the name of the kebab house, Sarah? Can you remember?
Yeah, it was Alton Town Kebab and Burger House.
And is it still going? Because they deserve a shout, I think.
I think there was a man called Ismurat who actually agreed to sponsor us.
Fantastic. I love things like that. Thank you. 28 minutes after 10 is the time. Here's another nice one. I have a 7-year-old girl who loves playing football. She plays for a local team. She came home one night and was so excited that the boys had, quotes, let her, end quotes, play a game with them. After last night's win, she turned to me and her dad and said, I wish it was school tomorrow so I could tell them that they can play football with me. This is the true victory of last night's win, and this one as well. Like my sister, I was crying tears of joy this is from Alison, when the Lionesses won yesterday. When I worked in a women's refuge, we would brace ourselves for the women being beaten up after football matches. This is massive for women in so many ways. I am so happy today. And this from Mel in Crouch End. What an amazing day for British women. I grew up in the States where most of our schools have girls' soccer teams. I think this will change now in a lot of schools. Maybe add girls' football programs, Mel in Crouch End. You can't really argue with any of that, can you? What amazes me is the resistance to it that we've encountered in this country over the years. And I can see why, looking at some of my messages from unhappy men. And there's no other nicer way of putting it. Dave explains it well, actually. Let me read Dave's text. He describes this. I'm finding the utter fragility of male egos fascinating after the weekend. So many blokes so quick to point out that the women couldn't beat the men's under-17 reserves at Kidderminster Harriers as some way to compensate for the fact that the women finally got 5 minutes of limelight at a Euro Cup outside of the men's season in front of a sellout crowd. Personally, I've got me and my daughter season tickets for Southampton Women's next season as a result, and she wants to join a local girls team. Now to find one which won't treat it as a poor offshoot of the boys' teams. That's from Dave, who's in Ringwood. And that is why it happened, I guess. The existence of people who today are And the problem is they're always going to be unhappy. You'd be unhappy if there still wasn't any women's football. It's not women's football that makes you unhappy. But that's why, I guess, resistance exists and why it was so difficult for so long for women to play football or for girls to play football. More of your stories about what it was like back in the day, 0345 60 60973, and what it will mean in your view or in your experience, what tonight's glorious victory will mean for the girls and the women in your life, or, of course, most obviously, you. Dominic Ellis is here now with the headlines. 10:33 is the time. Do you want to go meta on this? Do you want to go deep? Or should we just carry on with the happy reflections and, to a degree, the unhappy memories? Because it is fascinating that it was banned by the FA. Women's football was banned by the FA in 1921. I mean, that is breathtaking, right? Should we do the why? I mean, I'll read you. I feel I need to do a sort of Chumley Warner voice for this. You know, like a Pathé newsreader's voice. Complaints have been made. Complaints have been made as to football being played by women. Council felt impelled to express the strong opinion that the game of football is quite unsuitable for females and should not be encouraged. This is from 1921 in the United Kingdom. Shortly after, or 1 year after, 53,000 people had turned up at Goodison Park to watch a game, which raised thousands and thousands of pounds for, again, to keep things topical, thousands and thousands of pounds for the unemployed and disabled ex-servicemen. The year after that, they banned it. So complaints have also been made as to the conditions under which some of the matches have been arranged and played, and the appropriation of receipts to other than charitable objectives. The council are further of the opinion that an excessive proportion of the receipts are absorbed in expenses and an inadequate percentage devoted to charitable objects. For these reasons, the council requests the clubs belonging to the association refuse the use of their grounds for such matches. And without anywhere to play, so the women's game withered on the vine. They tried to ban it, or at least to place restrictions on it in the 1890s, when the FA Council, which was only still in short trousers itself at the time, sent warnings to clubs about letting their grounds be used for ladies' matches. In 1902, the FA passed a motion banning mixed-sex games, but there's also some evidence pointing to this ban having extended to women's teams in general and their use of FA-affiliated grounds. And some references suggest it was still in place as far back as 1917. It's a mad old business, isn't it? Elaine is in Dartford. Elaine, what would you like to say?
I think I'm probably a bit older than your last two commentators, because I can actually remember the men winning the 1966 World Cup.
Gosh.
Yeah, thank you. I was 6. Yeah. At that time, I went back to school. I want to play football. No, you can't play football. You're a girl. Behave like a girl. And I had that most of the way through my childhood. But the thing I did have also, although he didn't turn out to be so good, is my dad was absolutely fanatical football person. So he took me to Cheltenham, which was like the nearest one here. My grandparents lived in West Ham, so I went to West Ham as well.
Charlton,
but
you
all
said?
The time, Cheltenham.
So I thought you said Cheltenham. I was just trying to do some internal geography then in my head.
No, Cheltenham, South East London, Cheltenham.
No, I know.
Yeah, so most of my childhood, I did go to football. But I used to get the sly digs from men, boys as they were then, men as they got older. Yeah. You probably don't even understand the offside rule. You're just a woman. And I know the offside rule like the back of my hand. I've always have done. But as I got older, the more frustrated I got because there was nowhere for me to play football. By the time I was 11, they'd only just made it legal again. So it was really difficult to play football.
Was it 71? Was it 70?
Yeah, 71.
Yeah, good Lord.
So
you're aware of all this, are you, Elaine? You're at the vanguard of it.
Yes, because I kept moaning at everybody that had listened to me. I want to play football. I don't want to play rounders. I definitely don't want to play hockey because that's a lethal weapon in my hands. It was not a good thing.
As a kid, I always thought the idea of girls, it was girls when I was a kid, not being able to play football because it was so rough. And then you watched hockey, and latterly, one of my girls played lacrosse. I don't know if you ever... Look, I wouldn't go near a lacrosse pitch in a suit of bloody armour, Elaine.
No, it was scary. So anyway, as I got older, the more vocal I got about it, the more I got put down by men. And I do mean put down by men. I became a midwife in 19-something or the other.
Yeah.
And it became a real good talking point for men that had come in with their wives.
Yes.
I'd say, what football team do you support? And they'd look at me. And then we'd have a discussion. And then it got... I know it sounds daft, but it was a good breaking point to get people
Doesn't
to talk.
sound daft at all.
Anyhow,
Men are very uncomfortable in those scenarios, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that we shouldn't be the top priority in the Labour ward, but it's lovely that you spared a thought for us and our discomfort at those times.
One of the funniest stories I had is I worked at Woolwich, which was right near the barracks at the time, and I've eventually married a Scotsman who is a fanatical Celtic supporter.
Fantastic.
And I evicted a Rangers supporter from the ward, jokingly, because he came in his strip.
Right,
anyway,
on your bike.
That's by the by, yeah. I married my husband in 1978, and he always promised me he'd take me to football, to Celtic Park, because I'd only been to, quote him, the small little silly English clubs. Anyhow, I did get to Celtic Park, and we had a whale of a time. And the one thing that struck me, the difference up there, is there were older ladies, and I mean older ladies, in Celtic Park, shouting for Celtic, and they supported them all their life, and they were accepted at those supporters.
That's not unheard of. I mean, you see plenty of women in crowds in England.
I think it was me. It was that I hadn't seen it down here, but up there I did see it. So yeah, I'll give you that one. I totally agree with you. But I find the misogyny of the fact that they thought I had no idea about football the most frustrating thing. And seeing that little girl dancing the other night, I sat there and thought, brilliant, go for it, girl, because you are going to enjoy everything I couldn't enjoy. And I really, really, I just wanted to hug her.
That's lovely. That's really lovely. Go on.
Last night, when they won, I'm sitting there, tears rolling down my face, and my husband's going to me, you don't normally shout the England team on, you shout the Scotland team on. I said, this isn't that England team. This is the England women's team, and it's the women that have won. They've brought it home, not your silly men. The women have brought it home. And to me, that was a vindication for every single slight that I've had over the years, telling me, you don't understand football, you're just a woman, get back in your kitchen. And for me, that was 100% brilliant. And I was shouting unbelievably last night, and there were tears rolling down my face for ages, which sounds quite sad, really, at 61
It doesn't sound remotely sad. It doesn't sound remotely sad. Were you aware? Because sometimes we get taken by surprise about our feelings, don't we?
Yes, I was. Yeah. Yes, I was. Because You didn't
realise how much you were...
No, I didn't realise how much it meant to me.
Yes.
When that German... I mean, the first English goal was totally Henrik Larsson. It wasn't an Englishman goal. It was a Henrik Larsson goal. Look it up, you'll see what I mean. But the second goal, when the German goal went in, I sat there and my heart dropped. I thought, Elaine, it's only a game. This is what I've been told all these years.
Oh,
and then my husband's sitting there going to me, they'll win it, I said, they won't win it. Germany always blooming well wins. We never win against Germany. And then I got off of him, now you're being stupid because that's a man's thing you just said. And I agreed with him, basically. And when that second goal went in, I absolutely leapt off my chair, tears rolling down my face. My two dogs absolutely look at me as if I'd gone completely bananas.
Oh.
But to me, it was the joy that they're going to bring. I mean, looking at the people, even the fact we're talking about it so well today, and the fact that women have now gone and said, right, we've done it, now you bring it back in November. And I bet they can't.
But listen, you're just letting a little bit of needle creep in here, Elaine, on a day when I hoped we'd managed to keep the programme largely needle-free.
I don't mean that. I know. I hope they do bring it back. But to me, the one thing I did say to my husband last night is I hope in a way that the England men team don't do brilliantly, because this girls' team...
Because it would overshadow. I don't know about that. We'll have a think nearer the time.
The women's team deserves to be voted as a team personality of the year come December. They deserve it, and I hope nothing ever stops them doing that, because that's what they deserve. Every single one of them girls done it for the British women last night.
They really did.
They did.
I sense that if I don't interrupt you, Elaine, you're going to still be here when Sheila Fogarty turns up for work.
I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I mean, because what you're doing is it's not just your words, but your exuberance. It's like an unbottling, and this is what intrigues me. Just give me a moment, because I tell you what I'm hearing. You were robbed when you were a little girl, and possibly you hadn't actually fully appreciated the scale of that offence, how robbed you were and how unjust it was, because that was the way of the world and you just had to get... But you were robbed when you were a little girl, and last night somehow you felt part of that process, I did.
I mean, I didn't get a chance to play. I would have loved to. I would have given my hide teeth to play football. I couldn't. I used to go and watch my brothers play on a Saturday and a Sunday and watch my dad play, and I used to think, why can't I do it? What is it about me that I can't do? And whenever you try to bring it up at school or whatever, you were put down. And I'm bearing in mind, this is like the 70s going into the 80s. Misogyny was completely right through the world, then, whatever way you looked at it.
Of course
so all I was, I mean, even at school, I got taught how to do hand washing and ironing. And that to me just was ridiculous. The cooking I'll go with because I enjoyed the cooking, but being shown how to iron a shirt, you can't play football,
but you can iron the strip.
Exactly.
I love it.
To me, it's come on leaps and bounds since then, but it can only get better. Please let it get better.
Well, it can only think. I mean, you say things. I mean, I'm interviewing Brian Cox later, formerly of D-Ream, of course. So things can only get better. But we'll clip this call up, Elaine, and we'll put it out. And I'm pretty confident that some of the team will listen to it, and I bet they'll be very moved by the importance of what they've achieved to you and women like you up and down the country.
Yeah, because I can't be the only one. I can't be the only 61-year-old woman that never got a chance to kick a ball. But last night we're cheering them girls on like you would never believe.
Thank you, Elaine. You've made my day.
You're very welcome.
Oh, you're very welcome. No, you take care as well. There it is. Coach, never allowed to kick a ball, cheering those girls on like you wouldn't believe. I love that. And that was the bit that perhaps I'd underappreciated until, as I say, Alex Scott in particular and Ian Wright really took the opportunity, quite rightly, amid all the celebrations and the joy, to remind us, or in many cases, enlighten us about the off-the-pitch battles, or even if they couldn't get on the pitch at all, as Elaine has just reminded us, that this victory almost sort of signalled an end to. What an absolutely glorious day. Peak audience of 17.4, just under 17.5 million people watching it on the television last night. And as I say, it's been a lot of changes. I sometimes think, God, it's amazing how much things have changed while I've been doing this job. But I have actually been doing this job now for quite a long time. But colleagues this morning having a conversation about how the days when they were expected to find guests to come on the radio to talk about how there's no audience for women's football or you shouldn't have women's commentators. And remember, we're not a sports station, so it's quite a big deal to even do these as topics. But those days, I think we can all safely agree, are now firmly behind us. And of course, there are celebrations unfolding in London, which we'll find out a little. I presume there's an open-top bus. You can't win a cup without an open-top. If there's no open-top bus, I shall be writing to the authorities too sweet. 10:47 is the time. We needed some nice news as well, didn't we? Some unalloyed joy. And thanks to Elaine, I'm just looking at that Henrik Larsson goal against Rangers in 2000, and it is a thing of beauty and a little bit of a precursor for the first goal last night. A male voice next, one other than my own, which I think is reasonable because, of course, as we have established, the men have played a role of sorts in fixing the problems created by men when it came to stifling the women's game. 10:47 is the time. John's in Chesham. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
yeah, we did speak about this a couple of years ago, I think. But basically, I managed the side back in late 90s, early 2000s, from under 10s up to under 14s, 15s.
Yeah.
And we had a girl there that when she got to 11, FA said, no, you can't play in a mixed side. You have to go on a girls' side.
Right.
Now, her dad went on, built a girls' team around her. She went on to play for England 38 times. Then my son, right, I remember our last call. Yeah, you remember this one?
Yeah, I do
and then
now.
my son's, the girl up front, she's now, that we was on about, she's now signed for Arsenal's under-21s. She's just done an international competition out in Israel, got golden boot and scored 3 hat-tricks in 3 games. But one of the funniest, I'm going to go into something a bit more serious, like Wright he was on about, because he was spot on.
Yeah.
But before that, I'm going to tell you a funny. We was playing a game, right, she's up front. She's just cracked her 3rd goal, yeah. And her mother from the other side, which is an all-boys team, said, "Oh, I didn't think girls could play against boys."
Yeah. Funny,
so,
isn't it?
You know, and that was a mother, because she just, and I think he was the goalkeeper. I think that's what upset her.
Right.
But that's the sort of thing. But on another note, with this team that my son had, he had 4 girls in there originally. Yeah, 1 went on to do athletics and 3 played. One they could have had the choice of going into the Chesham's girls or stick with the mixed. So 3 of them stick with the mix for a while. Then one more girl went to same school with my grandson and played with my grandson. Went to all girls side. The other 2 played mixed right up. until now. Well, until one went to Arsenal and the other one's just gone all girls now. Now, the one that's going to the same school as my grandson, the school side, she can't play in.
Right.
Because they only play all boys. They will not play in mixed sides. And from what I'm getting is that's generally across the board. I'm not saying it's right through the country, but it seems like it's right across the board.
You don't hear of it much, do you?
So what my understanding is that our education system isn't working alongside the FA and the other sports organisations, which they should be doing.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? It's a really tricky one because if it's no football or mixed football, then everyone's going to think mixed football is a good idea. But I suppose as they get older, there will be reasons why perhaps you wouldn't necessarily. Well, there aren't, are there? It's not like rugby.
No,
I mean, you've got to look at you look at or even you say it's not like rugby, and then you think about some very.
They'll play rugby.
Well, you look at Rob Burrow playing for Leeds Rhinos when he'd spent his whole life being told he was too short and too slight ever to make an impact, and he was one of the finest rugby league players the world's ever seen. Yeah. So well, anyway,
the thing I see is that with this is that Mills, the girl that's gone on to do, is knocking on England's door now as well, without a doubt. That done her, and her dad always said this, and all the way through, and he played football in his day. And like he said, it's done her the flipping world of good to play in a mixed side. Absolutely, because it's built her strengths up. She doesn't get, and everything about it,
Also, you've got full teams turning out. There will still. I mean, that will be another thing that's changed massively overnight. It will feel like it's overnight. But last night's victory was the culmination of a long process and a big fight, as you remind us, John, and as Ian Wright reminded us last night, along with Alex Scott, who was part of the actual fight rather than observers like the men. Getting 22 people on the park would be a challenge if it was exclusively women, or exclusively girls. So playing in mixed sides obviously offers and offered huge opportunities. It is 10:52. Unlike every single newspaper, as far as I could tell this morning, the byline on our next report belongs to a woman, not a man. Charlotte Lynch is live for LBC in Trafalgar Square, where celebrations are already underway or about to get underway, Charlotte?
They're about to get underway, James. I am just looking at a sea of people. They have packed out Trafalgar Square, thousands of England fans ready to celebrate with the Lionesses the historic victory, and rightly so. People have come out in their thousands to support them, to cheer them on. There are people here, young and old, male and female. I've got with me now a group of girls. They all look like they're about under 10. They're so excited. How are you feeling, guys? And that just sums it up, James. That's the atmosphere here. You watched the match last night, didn't you? What was it like?
It was really nice.
It was really nice.
Especially when we won.
Yeah, and it's people like that, James, that have come out here to Trafalgar Square today. I tell you what, the atmosphere is just wonderful. It's so lovely, and it's, everyone's excited, but it's calm as well, because everyone's just feeling brilliant. Everyone's in great spirits. Everyone's hugging each other. They're thrilled. They've got England flags draped around them. They've got flags saying "It's home." Everybody's been chanting, and the big moment is, of course, going to be when the Lionesses get here on stage. That's what everybody has come to see. Savina Wiegman's side on stage, lifting that Euros trophy, their first ever trophy of a major tournament. It feels really special here in Trafalgar Square, James, and everybody is so excited to be here. Now we're expecting a big sort of open bus thing with them on the stage, some performances as well.
An open bus thing. It's an open top bus. It's part of the iconography of football victories. We love an open top bus. Where does it go? Will we be able to see it out the window here in Leicester Square? What's the route?
Yeah, you should be. Do you know what? I think it's going to go around Trafalgar Square. We should be able to see it. But I tell you what, if you can't, you're certainly going to be able to hear it, because there are just so many people here, thousands of them, and they're still pouring in now past me, waiting again, trying to get the best spot they can to see the team on the stage lifting that trophy.
I'll tell you what, if you want to get close to the team, Charlotte, you should get some Red Bull or something like that, because there's going to be some very bloodshot eyes and some very heavy heads turning up on that open top bus later today, judging by the exuberance and the euphoria that was on display last night when they crashed the manager's press conference. We'll hear from Charlotte Lynch again, no doubt, as those celebrations get underway in Trafalgar Square here in central London. Unbelievable. unbelievable is happening in London. I wonder how many times over the year, well, not that many, of course, because we very rarely get to the final, but the preparations have to be at least partly in place for a big celebration. And then, of course, the reality intervenes, but not this time. Jane is in Teignmouth in Devon. Jane, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Well, I'm here to give you the good news. I'm 64 and this year started playing football, walking football for women. And I can tell you that this is a huge, massive, growing sport.
Really?
All around us. Yep, all around us. Women are forming teams. We're playing in a tournament in a couple of weeks. Most of us are over 50. I'm 64. We have three. We have a 70-year-old, and we're all doing it. ITV came in, did a little piece on us. So don't give up hope. Like your other lady who was 61, go and play because it's happening. And it's so positive and joyful.
That's lovely. Well, when did it begin? When did you first get involved? So this was all underway before. This is what I meant a little bit by last night's victory being the culmination of progress and processes that have been in place for a very long time, and the improvements have been quietly achieved, haven't they? Away from the spotlight, away from the television cameras.
Yeah, I think, well, certainly down here, big up to Age UK. Yes. They started an initiative on the AstroTurf near us, where you could just go along and try it. Within 2 weeks, we'd formed a team. We've got sponsorship from local businesses. We've got kit. I've had to find myself in Sports Direct looking at boots. I hadn't got a clue, but we've all done it. We're all out there. And it was just that one initiative by Age UK, but it's happening all around. I mean, there's teams in Swanson, Caldecott. If you look on, there's a brilliant Facebook page called Ladies Walking Football UK, which is there to promote women's walking football, and it's fantastic, and anyone can do it. And I urge all the women of my generation who
to get out there. Well, it's got the lot, hasn't it? You get the exercise, you get the sociability of it, and you get with a bit of luck, you get a winner's medal. Good luck in the tournament, Jane. You're not sponsored by a kebab shop, are you?
No.
No. Well, I just thought that would be the icing on the cake, or the chili sauce on the doner, if you prefer. Thank you, Jane. Rob's in Bexhill-on-Sea. Rob, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I spoke to you once before over an Australian thing, but this is about the fantastic events of yesterday and the team and the rest of it. And I just wanted to say that in my professional life, I'm well retired now. I was a primary school head teacher.
Oh, yes.
And in the late 80s, early 90s, and of course I used to help run the football team. In fact, it was my caretaker that used to manage the team, and he was a great Charlton supporter because I came from South East London, Bexley then.
That's a double for Charlton then. That's Elaine as well. Charlton coming out, getting all the glory today. Sorry, carry on, Rob.
Well, absolutely. And of course the kids used to play in the playground. I had this football team. We were pretty good, I have to say. Although I had nothing to do with the training, I'm useless at football personally. Sure. But my caretaker was ace, and there was a girl, and all the boys said, she's fantastic, she's magic, let's have her in. And and she played for Charlton Girls, I think at the time. I don't know how they did it, the under-10s or something. So I approached the parents and I said, look, your daughter is ace.
Yeah.
What do you think about her playing in the boys' team? And they said, we'd love it. So I said, right, leave it with me. And I approached the local authority, which was Bexley, and they said, no, it's not covered by insurance.
Really?
And I was outraged.
How bizarre. How can they not be covered by insurance?
Well,
if the boys are.
So I got... Well, exactly.
We're short of time, Rob. We're short of time. So, do you know what?
Short of time. Sorry, I'm prattling on too much.
I would never use the word prattling, Rob.
That's going on too much. Right, I will be as brief as possible. Anyway, the end result was everything was agreed, and she played, and we won the league.
How did the boys deal with it? Just briefly.
They were fine. They were absolutely
from the very
fine.
start, from the beginning.
Yeah,
and when they saw how good she was, probably.
And the other thing was, other girls then got involved, and when I saw, and this was what I'm trying to say about this cathartic moment that we're witnessing, is that when the girls played, if they bumped into one another, there was no aggression. They would just say, "Oh, sorry," and they got on and playing, and that wasn't like a man be pat. Oh, I can't say it, but you know what I mean.
I do know. I know what you mean. It was just a little bit more civilized and well mannered. Although I don't know if you can lip read. But I think that Jill Scott, among others, would have rather given the lie to the idea that there's no argy-bargy in the women's game last night. She came out like a wrecking ball. It is. Thank you, Rob. Lovely stuff. It is coming up to 11 o'clock, and we will move on now from a particularly pleasant phone. And an awful lot of love coming in for all the callers today. But I don't think anyone would be surprised to learn that if there was a Woman of the Match award, then Elaine would have won it with ease. Up next. I couldn't quite work out what it was about Rishi Sunak's suggestion that patients who miss an NHS appointment should be fined 10 quid. You'll be delighted to learn I've worked out exactly what it is that annoys me. 4 minutes after 11. So, look, you see a story sometimes, don't you? And you think to yourself, that's a bit weird, that's a bit rum. There are times, increasingly, with this particular government in all its iterations, where I do wonder whether they're getting their policy ideas from LBC radio phone-ins from about 1984. It'll be the death penalty next that they're bringing back. But on this occasion, charging people who don't turn up for GP appointments or for NHS appointments is something that's been put forward by Rishi Sunak, who, the longer this campaign goes on, and there's still time for it to change, there's 6 weeks left, and if we've learned anything over the last few years, it's not to count any chickens before they hatch. It's a spectacularly interesting intervention, but one that appears, albeit from the son of medics, appears to be built upon absolute nonsense. And I was trying to work out what it was about the story that intrigued me most. And it's that thing that we talked about. Listen, if you'd been in charge for 12 years, if you'd been in charge of this country for 12 years, latterly as the second most senior member of government, and given how lazy the most senior member of government was, there's probably a case to be made for Rishi Sunak having been the most important member of government during his period as Chancellor of the Exchequer. How much responsibility would you take for the state of the NHS? If you'd been a member of the ruling party for the last 12 years, how much responsibility would you take? This is what's astonishing about the whole political landscape at the moment, is that they have been in power for 12 years. They have been in charge of the railways. They have been in charge of the health service. They have been in charge of our schools. They have been in charge of GP surgeries. They've been in charge of our ports. They've been in charge of our borders. They've been in charge of the army. They've been in charge of the internet, or at least legislation regarding the internet. They've been in charge of everything for 12 years. And guess who's the longest serving member of that cabal? It's actually Liz Truss, the woman most likely to become the next Prime Minister. So if you were to simply look at CVs from a perspective of being a little bit unhappy about the state of the nation, then very simply the person who is still in the frame to be Prime Minister, who bears the most responsibility for the state of the nation, if you believe that governments play any role at all in the state of the countries they govern, then Liz Truss would be top of the list. Her fingerprints are much more pronounced than any other member of government on the current state of affairs, because she's been in the cabinet since David Cameron was Prime Minister, since I think about 2014. I don't know if he brought her in straight away. I could be wrong. I can't be bothered to check. But the point, just on the detail, I know that she's the longest serving. That I don't quite get this. I don't know why you let them do it. They've been in charge for 12 years. And of course, that's the point. That was the Rishi Sunak. That was the bit that I couldn't quite get. And then the penny drops. And it's one of those moments where, unless you are a genius, you're going to struggle to persuade me that I'm wrong on this. So here's the thing, right? Bad governments, and I'm going to say bad governments. I'm not going to say right-wing governments. I'm not going to say conservative governments. I'm going to say this government is a bad government, has been for a very long time. But not all bad governments are right. I mean, that would be a stupid thing to believe. But really bad governments prioritise passing the buck above almost anything else. And I've said to you quite a few times now that when I stop being taken by surprise or thinking that I've finally understood something for the first time, that's when I will retire. That's when I will hang up my headphones. Because I kind of couldn't quite believe the simplicity of this thought when it struck me. And wait, it's a bit more detailed than the current analysis allows. Because I'm looking at Rishi Sunak and I'm thinking, you're the son of a GP, the son of a pharmacist. You must know quite a lot about the NHS from the inside and the outside. Why are you suggesting that its problems can be fixed by charging people who miss appointments 10 quid? And then the answer is obviously because the alternative would involve admitting that the problems are actually caused by the people that have been in charge for the last 12 years. That bit's obvious. So then you begin to wonder, well, it's a bit of an odd target, isn't it? But of course, here it comes. You can't blame all the usual bits. I don't know how old you are, but you would probably have been expected to blame health tourism not long ago at this point for the state of the NHS. It was all those people coming here from the European Union and working hard and paying taxes, but in your view, not being entitled to NHS coverage. Or it would be all those unemployed people who aren't paying tax on their earnings because they don't actually earn work. They get unemployment benefit, which might be taxed, but, you know, they're clogging up the hospital. So you've got health tourists, and then you've got the unemployed. But we've got de facto full employment now. So you can't blame the unemployed for the state of the NHS, and you can't blame health tourism for the state of the NHS. You can't blame the European Union for the state of the NHS. God, who can we blame now for the state of the NHS? Says Rishi Sunak, I know who we can blame. Let's blame the patients. At what point does this madness fall apart? How do you blame the patients for the state of the NHS? Well, I suppose we can blame them for getting ill, so we can continue to demonise obesity, perhaps, or something like that, without doing anything to help reduce it, and getting rid of measures brought about as in the hope of actually reducing obesity, because idiot so-called libertarians who refuse to tell you who pays the wages of their so-called think tanks have campaigned successfully against fat taxes or whatever you want to call them. How are you going to blame the patients? Well, let's blame the ones that don't turn up. So you are successfully, I presume successfully, otherwise they wouldn't have bothered doing it. They are successfully persuading British people to blame unidentified British people who have missed NHS appointments for undisclosed reasons for the state of the NHS. I've said it before and I'll say it again. What makes me cross, and indeed what gets me out of bed every morning, is anger at how stupid they think you are. So the same people who 5 years ago would have been blaming health tourism, it's the National Health Service, not the international. You see, I say this stuff and I have to double check I didn't dream it. Was anyone ever that stupid? Yep. I think it was one of Nigel Farage's favourite catchphrases, wasn't it? It's the National Health Service, not the International Health Service. We can't really do that anymore because you've abolished all our freedom of movement. Okay, well, it's the unemployed, isn't it? Not really, no, because we've got de facto full employment in many ways now. I mean, vacancies everywhere, way more vacancies than there are people not. So we can't really. Could it be the fault of the politicians, do you think? I mean, successive secretaries of state for health, Jeremy Hunt and the rest of them. Wash your mouth out with carbolic soap, O'Brien. How dare you suggest that the party in charge for the last 12 years of the NHS bears any responsibility whatsoever for problems being faced by the NHS? And whatever you do, do not mention that in 2010, the NHS recorded its highest ever patient satisfaction when surveyed in the history of that record, which doesn't go back forever, but still, it's kind of significant. What could possibly have happened over the last 12 years to describe why it's so hard to get appointments? There's a huge shortage of doctors. Well, it couldn't possibly have anything to do with the people who've been running the NHS for the past 12 years, could it? No, it's all about people who miss appointments. Oh, okay. What are you going to do, Mr. Sunak, about patients who never received the letter confirming their appointment for whatever reason? How are you going to prove to them that they got the letter or the text or the email that confirmed their appointment if they claim they never got it? How are you going to deal with those whose letter cancelling the appointment was sent out in error? Or, I mean, the list of problems. What are you going to do to people who are persistent offenders? What are you going to do to people who are too sick to attend and can't get through to the surgery to tell you that they're going to offend? Are we going to just let persistent offenders get blacklisted by the NHS and die untreated? It is an astonishing intervention by a man who appears to have become a fully paid up member of the treat them as if they're stupid and you'll never be disappointed school of conservative politics. One GP writing to the Times today says, we've always got extra patients. We're always overbooked. I'm quite relieved if the occasional booked patient doesn't turn up, as it's the only way I can even vaguely keep up. It's usually because the patient's problem has resolved and the non-attendance allows a slot for an emergency. The time is never wasted. Unbelievable. What are we to make of this idea? And I'd like you to come at it from all of the available angles, okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It might be that there is a little bit of wisdom to this idea. Listen, even a stop clock is right twice a day, but the only people who can tell me that are NHS workers, okay? How big a scourge is the scourge of the missed appointment? 0345 6060 973. And similarly, I guess you'd have to have some skin in the game to tell me how plausible this particular solution would be. What happens if I refuse to pay and I'm dying? What happens if I haven't got 10 quid? Also, I don't think anyone who has any experience whatsoever of, for example, public transport in rural areas could imagine for a single second that getting to and from an NHS appointment is a matter of ease and facility. It just isn't true. I mean, there are a million reasons why you might not. But some areas, when you got 2 buses a week, you were promised a lift and then it doesn't turn up. So what happens if you don't pay your fare? Do you see what I mean? To me, the more I think about this proposal, the stupider it becomes. But I am perfectly open to the explanation that it might actually serve a positive purpose. 0345 6060 973. And then we come to the ugly part of this analysis, because it's a bit stupid, it's a bit unthought through, it creates more problems than it solves. That's in the eye of the beholder. But then we come to the ugly part of it, and in a way I want you to, well, I'm not going to tell you what I want you to do. You do whatever you want, it's your show as much as mine. But does this feel to you like a sort of wheel of misfortune? This dial, the number of people they can blame for the problems in this country is diminished. I mean, of course, they've started blaming each other. We are in a remarkable state of affairs now where I think, let me get this absolutely right. The person who has been Chancellor of the Exchequer for the last few years is speaking about the economic policies of the woman who has been Foreign Secretary for the last few years as being a matter of decades-long failure. Let me get this right. David Aranovich of the Times has tweeted it quite pithily. This morning I learned from the man who was Chancellor of the Exchequer until a few weeks ago that the business rates policy of the woman who is Foreign Secretary has been a failure for the last decade. Can anyone even bother to ask the obvious question? So he's criticising himself, apparently, Rishi Sunak. The mess of this circular firing squad is quite incredible. And yet, no doubt, if I was working for the Daily Mail, I'd be having to talk about what a tough time Keir Starmer's having a tough time of it at the moment. I read a line that I wish I'd written, which happens to me quite a lot, but not as often as you might imagine. I read a line, I think it was in The Spectator, but it was quoting a Tory source. I saw it on Twitter. That's why I can't be 100% sure of its provenance. But it was quoting a Tory source. And this, I think, is the best summation of British politics that you will hear all day, possibly all week. It simply said that if people believe there is an imaginary river, you don't tell them that the river doesn't exist, you build them an imaginary bridge. We haven't even mentioned the B word. Brexit, not bridge. But my goodness me, doesn't that just about sum everything up at the moment? And of course, the selection of our next Prime Minister is being undertaken almost exclusively by people who believe in an imaginary river. I find that quite unnerving. But here we go. Maybe it's a good idea. You tell me. 0345 6060 973. Is there an army of, Baron Munchausen syndrome sufferers, people who are constantly booking medical appointments and they're not turning up because they think it's funny, or just because people who've got no good reason for missing an appointment? If you were looking at the NHS as someone who works in it and you said, how can we fix this problem of overwork, understaff, low morale, poor facilities, would you honestly, and I mean this, I don't want to sound facetious, would you put missed appointments on the list? And if you were to put missed appointments on the list as a major cause of current problems in the NHS, would you put charging those patients £10 a pop on the list of possible solutions? Because I hate it when this happens. I can see it appealing to a very, very unthoughtful, easily provoked, slightly ignorant worldview, particularly cap-doffing, forelock-tugging, slavish supporter of the Tory party, regardless of who's leading it and what they're doing. But I can't see it appealing to anybody capable of sophisticated thought. I could be wrong. 0345 6060 973. It is 20 minutes after 11. Another letter in the Times today caught my eye. How will Rishi Sunak's planned fine be collected? Past experience shows that the cost of gathering the money would far exceed the amount collected. Before the NHS, there was a charge for visiting the GP, which not everyone could pay all at once. Wait for it. My GP father then had to employ a debt collector to retrieve the outstanding amounts. 5 shillings or 25p. A lot of money in those days. And here's the killer line, possibly literally. That is why people only went to the doctor if they were ill. So it almost sounds supportive in a sense. But of course, it could equally have ended. That is why people didn't go to the doctor even if they were ill. Michael's in Deal. Michael, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James. Good to speak to you. And just short thing. Thanks for what you did for Grenfell. I started listening to you around then, and it did what you did then. But I'll get on to my point.
No, it's not over yet. Cheers, though.
No, it isn't. So I still work for the NHS, but I work for a London trust, and my specific job was actually to chase people who missed appointments.
Right.
And much like what the government introduces these days, it sort of your knee-jerk reaction is, oh, that's a good idea, but then you get into it. And
only if you're a jerk with busy knee. No, it's not. No, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, that sounds like a major problem. Good idea. They're trying to fix it. You're right. I take that back.
The reason I say that is, so from my perspective, when I was booking appointments, I was booking for children, and what you want to do is you want to get every clinic filled, you want to get every space, you want to get as many children in and seen, because at the end of the day, it's their health you're trying to sort out.
Of course.
When someone misses that appointment, the frustration is, oh, I've got 3 or 4 other urgent kids who could have taken that slot. And then, what happens? Oh, I didn't book that child. What happens to that child now? So they get sick or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's what always weighed on my mind. And there were days where you'd get, and don't get me wrong, there's not many parents like this. In my 2 years experience, it was probably 2 or 3 parents in the whole time.
Gosh.
But you'd get people who seriously abused the system.
Yes, of course.
And in that frustration, you would think, oh, I wish I could charge them a tenner. I wish I could, just to make them not miss appointments, because that's a sick child that's missing an appointment. But again, what you said today, how do you enforce that? Is the means to enforce that going to end up costing more than charging the parents? And also, we shouldn't penalise the entire population for what a very, very small amount of people do. The NHS is meant to be free at the point of use. And my fear with this is...
That's next in the firing line, just in case you don't know that already. That'll be next in the firing line.
That's my fear. It will start with this, and then, oh, well, we could also charge for this. Oh, what about this? What about this? It feels like this might just be a start to things. So from my experience, when I first heard it, and thinking back to my time when I was doing that role, I thought, oh, okay. But then I thought, actually, no, this just sounds like they're trying to incrementally creep in privatisation.
Any way of raising money? Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know that let's park that fear, perhaps naively, that it isn't a thin end of the wedge thing. It's a self-contained and specific attempt to address a real and present problem. But the problem isn't very big, or at least the kind of patients or parents of patients in your work who are, what would we call, feckless, irresponsible, who are taking the mick. I would say
irresponsible.
Yeah. There are, as you suggest, a vanishingly small number of them, but there are more missed appointments than there are feckless parents. So what other reasons would you come across for when you were trying to track people down? What other reasons would you come across for people missing appointments?
So the big one, because we were a specialist hospital, it meant that you've got people coming in from way, way across the country to come into us.
Yeah.
The big one was train fares. It costs so much to travel on our train system. But then you add in the fact that if they've got other kids who aren't in school, you've got to think about childcare costs. Who's going to pick up their other kids after 3 o'clock? Because we can't tailor appointments that well. They're on a set time, a set date.
So you accept the appointment because you're desperate for it, and you do so hoping you'll be able to deal with all of the factors that you've just discussed. And then when push comes to shove, sometimes on the day of the appointment itself, you find out that you can't.
Yeah, grandparents can't take care of the kids, or the train fares too much. I mean, looking at now, going back to London sometimes, if you don't book in advance, you're talking 50 quid for a ticket, just from where I am. It's ridiculous. And, sometimes you can't book in advance for appointments. The doctor will say, I need to see this kid now. You call mum or dad, can you come in 24 hours? They know how serious it is, so they'll say yes. But then again, they'll go and check something. They'll go and check childcare arrangements. And it's just not possible. And,
just their bank balance. You see, this is so frightening, isn't it? And just for people tuning in, it is your job to chase up people who've, among other things, it has been your job in your career to chase up people who've missed appointments.
Yeah, call them, email them, send letters out, check when the letters went out. We had meetings with, the heads of the services, looking at we call them DNAs, did not attend rates, what we can do about changing that. In the most serious cases, if someone persistently refuses to come in, you have 2 courses of action. You then go to a doctor and say, okay, they're refusing to come in, what should we do?
Right.
If it's safe to discharge, the doctor will say, okay, well, we can discharge them back to their GP. In some cases, the doctor will go, well, no, we need to see this child. So then it goes to safeguarding. But again, with these people, it's,
so it's a non-existent river that they're building a non-existent bridge for. So there isn't, there is a problem, but it's not a problem that impacts on the...
It's making a mountain out of a molehill.
And then when there are real problems with people who can't come to appointments, it's a consequence of other areas of Tory party policy, whether you're looking at the cost of childcare or transport costs.
That's the thing. And my thing is, this money could be put into transport. We used to do a lot more of transport, of getting patients in, which would alleviate that fear of having to travel that long distance or train fare. We used to accommodate a lot more people. So, okay, you're coming from 200 miles away, we'll put you up for a couple of days in accommodation at the hospital. So that would help. Things like that have slowly been chipped away just because, the NHS hasn't got the money for it anymore. They haven't got the funding for it. And it's not their fault. It's not the parents' fault.
No. It's certainly not the government's fault, though. So it's it's all the fault of people who don't turn up for their appointments.
Yeah, no. It's just nothing to do with them.
Listen, your horse's mouth, Michael. You're close to getting a Ray Liotta, but I think there's probably quite a few people in your position doing similar jobs. That's the only reason why you don't get one. But there it is. First call, first item of evidence, and of course that you may well have different experiences, but when you prioritise experience over opinion, you are going to get a lot closer to reality. And that's the reality. From Michael's perspective, of someone whose job it has been to chase up people who have missed NHS appointments. Apart from a tiny number of people who are possibly in need of attention from social services or partner agencies, which are also going to be criminally underfunded, under-resourced and under pressure, the reality will be that people do not miss NHS appointments. And this is my presumption. People do not miss NHS appointments sort of randomly or fecklessly. I hadn't even thought about that. I mentioned public transport, but I was thinking more about how hard it can be to get from A to B in rural areas. I'm afraid in my own naive way, I didn't factor in the simple cost of things, particularly for long journeys. And then, of course, there's childcare. Ibrahim is in Altrincham. Ibrahim, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm a specialist in developmental pediatrics, which involves patients with autism, ADHD, that sort of thing, anything that affects development of childhood, really.
Right. I bet you're busy.
Very, very busy. And that is actually one of the problems. Our waiting list has increased. Our waiting list has increased over COVID. We've had an influx of referrals,
of course,
about 2 times since COVID has happened, and we have the same number of staff. And generally, just going to the point of missed appointments with ADHD as part of the condition, one of the things that people experience is inattention and forgetfulness. So often within this area particularly, we do actually have a lot of appointments. But I think one of the GPs in that Times column mentioned that actually no time is wasted, and they're usually over capacity.
Yes.
This is the same case in my experience as well, where we see 7 patients in a session, which isn't very much compared to GPs, but often the issues that we have to deal with are quite complex and it needs a lengthy amount of time. And often I get between 4 and 5 turning up on average, maybe 6.
Right.
And every time I have one not turning up, I'm very relieved, because I actually do need that time. If everyone does turn up, I'm going into my admin time.
So you're overbooked. I mean,
always overbooked.
Through necessity.
Yeah,
okay, so where are, and I'm not putting pressure on you to come up with them, but where are the NHS professionals whose concerns Rishi Sunak is addressing? Because if your experience is common, if the last fellow's experience is common, then they're almost finding a problem, which is missed appointments, and turning it into something that it isn't, which is a reason for broader systemic problems in the NHS. So my unhappiness, if I turn up or I can't get an appointment or the waiting list is so long, I am, I think, being encouraged to get cross with a largely non-existent cohort of people who miss their appointments, even though the ones who do that miss their appointments generally provide a bit of relief to the healthcare professionals like you.
No, completely agree.
It's nuts.
I definitely think it's definitely a simplistic problem, and I think the problems with the NHS are very broad and spanning lots of different areers. I think we do need to think about this idea around free at the point of use, because because I'm a pharmacist by background,
right?
And if we think about when the NHS was formed, what was the cost of healthcare?
Yeah.
How long were people living? And what are the costs of drugs? I am involved in helping support commissioning of services as well.
Right.
And often, obviously, drugs are becoming more expensive now. How much was the NHS costing per individual back then? How much is it costing now? I mean, if somebody did an analysis of it, actually, it would be costing a lot more per one person.
Yeah, so treatments go on for longer, and you're really describing life expectancy and population. We won't fall out over this. I'm confident that as a country there is more than enough money to provide an NHS that is free at the point of care, but under the current taxation system, then you probably have a point, which for me is an argument to change the taxation system, not to change the free at the point of care model of the NHS, and there is one of the big battles that is coming up on the horizon of British politics, as some people warned you 10 years ago was likely to happen. But Ibrahim, the work that you do means that I wouldn't pick a fight with you on this issue. 11:32 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here with your headlines. It is 11:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got a mini vacancy, a vacancy of sorts for our conversation in the final hour. If there's something that you are desperate to draw attention to, then do feel free. I also have a woke watch that very neatly addresses the glorious victory by the Lionesses in the football last night. Speaking of politics and Rishi Sunak's proposal to fine patients £10 for missing an NHS appointment, which it's currently rather hard to find anyone in the NHS who thinks that's a good idea. Liz Truss's announcement today is that she will allow more migrants to pick fruit. I thought we'd just pick up the syntax of that at the moment. She would allow more migrants to pick fruit. That's the headline again in the Times newspaper. Liz Truss has promised to extend a scheme allowing unskilled migrants to pick fruit and vegetables as part of a package to boost food security.